Integrated schools seemed like an impossible pipe dream, except to the Brown family.
Somebody had to start it, my father said. Somebody had to take a stand. I remember that my father took me by the hand and we walked together to Sumner School. My father tried to enroll me in the school for the next year, and they told him that I couldn't go there because I was a Negro. Then he asked to see the principal.
When the Reverend Oliver Brown returned home that day, he was extremely angry. His simple request had been denied. He also knew he had to do something dramatic if changes were to take place. So, he went to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, for assistance. They filed a lawsuit in Topeka in order to seek action through the court on the principle that educational facilities for black children were inadequate.
The 14th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified on July 9, 1868. It granted citizenship to all people born in the United States, which included former slaves. It forbids states from denying any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, or to deny any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of laws. Now, you would think that this would be the end of unequal treatment of African Americans in the United States, but that was not the case. Several people in the South did not agree with the 14th Amendment and created what is called Jim Crow laws. These laws legalized racist policies that did not provide African Americans with equal rights as the 14th Amendment promised. African Americans were forced to use separate bathrooms, drinking fountains, restaurants, schools, and more because they claimed these new laws were keeping black and white separate but equal. Many African Americans tried to fight for their rights in courtrooms instead of boycotts and protests. In an 1896 case, Plessy v. Ferguson, a 1/8 black man tried to appeal in court as he was told he was not allowed to sit in the white-only coach on a train. He lost in court, which further influenced keeping black and white separate.
Organizations were created in response to the unequal and unfair treatment of African Americans during the time. In 1909, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, often called the NAACP, was founded in New York City in response to the continuing practice of lynching. Unlike activists like Martin Luther King Jr., this organization worked against racial inequality using the court system. The NAACP was backed by W.E.B. Du Bois, a civil rights activist who was editor of the organization's magazine, The Crisis. This magazine was the crusading voice for civil rights as it confronted critical issues concerning African Americans. In 1954, the NAACP took on the case Brown v. Board of Education as they strongly disagreed with the separate but equal policies. Some lawyers believed that they could show that state governments failed to provide separate public schools in a way that satisfied the equal protection requirement of the 14th Amendment. Thurgood Marshall was one of these lawyers. He believed the law was the only way to overcome racism. Marshall is one of the greatest and most important figures of the American Civil Rights Movement.
His interest in equal rights for black and whites began when he tried to get into Maryland Law School. Marshall had outstanding grades and credentials, but was denied because of his race. After graduating from Howard University instead, he took on several cases for the NAACP. Marshall won many cases in which he defended African Americans whose rights had been violated. In 1954, the NAACP requested Marshall for assistance with the Brown family in Topeka, Kansas, on the Brown v. Board of Education case. In this case, Marshall challenged the separate but equal policies in many public schools. Oliver Brown was the father of 3 African American daughters. To get to the closest black public school, the young girls had to walk over a mile and cross a dangerous railroad yard. Mr. Brown tried to take his kids to different, closer schools, but was denied because they only accepted white children. 8 other families, along with the Browns, had similar challenges, and Marshall decided to build a case against the school for not allowing their kids equal opportunities for education.
At first, the Supreme Court ruled against Marshall and the families. The NAACP fought for an appeal, and the Supreme Court affirmed the right of all children to attend the schools of their choosing and overturned the foundation of segregation in the South, the separate but equal policies. This case ended racial discrimination in the education field. The Brown v. Board of Education was the beginning of a snowball effect and influenced other civil rights issues to be resolved.
Just as Brown v. Board was a controversy during the Civil Rights era, Euthanasia is a worldwide controversy now. Euthanasia is the practice of ending a life prematurely to end pain and suffering. There are two types of euthanasia. Euthanasia typically refers to a doctor administering the lethal dose themselves, while assisted suicide refers to a doctor providing a patient with the drugs. There is also a distinction between voluntary and involuntary euthanasia. Voluntary euthanasia occurs when a patient chooses to have it administered to end their suffering, while involuntary euthanasia is administered without a person's permission, such as in cases of criminal execution. Currently, euthanasia is illegal in most of the world because it is considered murder. However, euthanasia was recently made legal in Oregon with the Death with Dignity law. Supporters of this bill say that it was passed so that dying citizens can control the timing and manner of their death in a humane and dignified way, and to respect a doctor-patient relationship. This law has been utilized by Brittany Maynard, a cancer patient who chose euthanasia instead of passing away from cancer.
You kind of look different. And
I look really different.
Yeah, you do. You've changed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's changed your physical appearance.
It changes your entire life. Every single part of who I was building myself into and my life, like in a way, has been altered.
You look in the mirror, and do you ever see yourself and like, that doesn't look like me. That's not me.
Yes, that happens every day. The medication changes the way you feel and the way you look, and that's part of being a cancer patient. That's really like the petty side. It's taken away my ability to drive because I have seizures now. And it's taken away my ability to have the job that I had, that I loved. And it's taken away my ability to continue to try to have children with my husband. And it's made us move our entire life to a different state. So, I mean, you can pretty much take any aspect of my life, from what may seem like a small petty thing to these huge monumental life changes. It's all been altered by my illness. And that's where the selflessness of my family comes in, because they've all sacrificed so much. It's not just all poor me. It's everyone's been giving. Everyone's been bending over backwards to make sure that I don't suffer. And I don't want them to suffer either, because I think for them to watch me pass the long way in hospice would just be excruciating, not only for me, but for all my loved ones.
By choosing euthanasia, Brittany ended her life of her own accord, and her family did not have to watch her suffer. She is a leader of the pro-euthanasia side and worked for Compassion and Choices, America's leading end-of-life choice organization, as well as starting the Brittany Maynard Fund to support the end-of-life choice movement. While only 5 states in the U.S. have legalized euthanasia, support is rising. According to a survey of 1,001 Americans, 42% supported euthanasia, while only 37% opposed euthanasia, and the other 22% were unsure. Euthanasia and Brown v. Board are both examples of citizens fighting for rights. By raising awareness and creating organizations such as the NAACP and Compassion and Choices, citizens call attention to and attempt to earn the rights they believe they deserve.